For several years, Bashar Kirma has been facilitating a youth-driven spiritual formation group called Silent Saints. They're not scholars, but average people tackling some of life's most complex questions. It's a call to rise above anger, depression, uncertainty, and negativity in life. It's a call to find genuine peace and happiness. It's a call to change the world. Here is Silent Saints.
Thanks again for joining us on this episode of the Silent Saints. As mentioned, last time we discussed relativism. The problem with relativism is that it does not recognize such a thing as absolute truth. And what we had seen is that there is, in fact, such a thing as absolute truth. What we also see is that relativism means being open-minded. But unfortunately, from experience, we recognize that people who claim relativism are open-minded to everything except religious views. So back to this absolute truth. One absolute truth that we know and we cannot run away from is the reality that we are imperfect and we will do wrong things. Spiritually speaking, these wrong things we refer to as sins. Therefore, we call ourselves sinners. Before we talk about sin, let's see who's with us today.
Alvin.
Rachel.
Bridget.
Justine.
Jacob.
Very good. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
So, when we're talking about sin, actually, before we talk about sin, we had given you a spiritual assignment or an intellectual assignment to work on, and that is to record the number of times cuss words or bad words you use in a day. So, we had done this assignment a while ago, if you guys remember. And tell me, how did it go? How did the progress, when you first started doing it, first time recording it, and then the next time, and the next time, and the next time, how did that go?
I've done this exercise in the past, and from before and after the exercise completed, it was like a couple week span. After, it was like a fraction of what it used to be. And you get real surprised as you're counting how many times you cuss. You'd be surprised how many times you really do. You don't really notice it until you start counting. So.
One thing I love, being from a Middle Eastern culture, of course, many family members we have seem to, they cuss in the native language. Or, they would cuss in a different language, not in the native language. They would cuss, for example, in English because they think God can hear them if they were to cuss in Chaldean or something like that. And then we have the opposite people who just can't control their mouth, and the cussing in Chaldean would come out just natural flow, unfortunately. So, but one way to control it, and that is to count it. Rachel, how did you do when you did that exercise?
So as you had mentioned, we've practiced this exercise several times, and I'm happy to say that I have not sworn once since our last episode.
That's excellent. Bridget?
Well, in the past, when I first did the cuss count, it was awful. So I'm not gonna lie. It was actually kind of sad, like seeing how many times that you do use a swear word in a day. It's at the end of it all, you feel less intelligent. Well, I felt less intelligent when I saw all those hash marks.
Sure.
Yeah,
Every time you kind of recorded one, you're like, oh, here's one more to add to the list. Do you remember how you did it? Did you hold a notebook in your hand on a daily basis?
I did. I had a piece of paper in my back pocket, and every time I swore, I would. Yep.
That's funny. Justine, how'd you do?
Well, when we previously did this, I actually found myself to swear more through texting rather than saying it out loud. But now, as I'm consciously thinking about it, I'm not doing it as much, and I can honestly say that I haven't done it once.
You're right. This is something that I noticed also when I was counting, is having that paper in front of me or with me all the time, and I'm counting and I'm conscious of it. What I ended up doing is catching myself the next time. It's a habitual thing. So what I found out is I had it habitually. I just say it without recognizing that I'm saying it. But once I'm recognizing that I'm saying it, and I have to write it down, and I look at the end of the day and I'm like, oh my goodness, the list is so long. The next day I would go, all right, I'm just going to try to control that this time or this many times. So it stayed on my mind the whole time, and that's how each day it went down to be reduced. Jacob, how about you?
Well, when I committed to the practice of, counting my cuss words, it happened at work. So I kind of got tired of it and I stopped writing, because every time a customer comes in, we would joke around, we would cuss, you wouldn't really think about it. It was like, it came natural, but eventually I began to realize that, all right, look, either I could speak to this guy and uplift him in some way, or I could cuss and be stupid about it, So I just started becoming subconscious and conscious of my cuss words, and I just started stopping, It started helping me, so.
Sure, that makes sense.
I agree with Jacob. I think it became such a burden, and that's what motivated me really to stop the swearing. And the beauty of this activity is that when I was being forced to count my swear words, it made me realize that I was acknowledging other things in my life as well. So I started to acknowledge all the times I sinned. So it led me to be more conscious of that, and I really liked it.
It is a nice exercise. In fact, I would recommend for you, if you can do this exercise with your friends or your family, somebody you're comfortable with, you're going to see, take it to heart, but take it, seriously, and get a piece of paper or get a journal, whatever it is, carry it with you, or on our smartphones. A lot of people in the group, when they did it on their smartphones. Do it on your smartphone. Just put a counter in there, and every time, click that counter. And you're going to see how incredible that high that number is. But if it's not, that's okay. That's very good. Eventually, it counts for even other sins that we would do or wrongdoings that we would do. All right, this leads us right into the topic of today. And we are talking about, again, the wrongdoings, and spiritually we refer to it as sin. So we're going to discuss sin. You guys had the opportunity to ask the people ahead of time what they think sin is. What'd you get?
Well, when I asked a couple of friends of mine, it's a separation between God. And then when I asked another person, they told me that it's doing something wrong while knowing you're doing it wrong. So.
Okay, that's fair. That's a fair comment.
When I talked to my friends, I talked to a friend, he actually told me that sin doesn't exist. I told him about the absolute truth, told him about relativism or whatever, and he just said most of the times sin is really our conscious of what we think is wrong or right, in a sense. So if you feel bad about this, then you're going to feel bad about this. But if you feel good about it, you're going to feel good about it. So really sin is just a made-up word. That's what he told me. So.
It's relative.
Yeah, it's relative.
Yes. Unfortunately, I came across a situation like that too. And I described to the person, I said, all right, let's take it from sin to wrongdoing. Do you ever do something wrong? Oddly enough, the response was the same. Well, what's wrong to me or wrongdoing to me maybe is right to you, and vice versa. So then we went into the whole topic of relativism, and we concluded that, wait a second, you have to be held responsible for something that you did wrong. The question was whether it was intentional or non-intentional. That's where we came in. Alvin, how about you? What'd you get?
Me, I asked a couple people at work, and this one girl told me that sin is doing something wrong and you knowing that you're doing something wrong. But then she also added that, but sin isn't, it's not that sin isn't always wrong. She said it like sin it feels right, but we really know that morally it's wrong. And not even if we call it, even if we don't call it sin, even if we call it wrongdoing. Like for example, speeding. I'm not gonna lie, I sped half the way here. You know, I was running late, so I had to get here quick. But
If you're a cop and you're watching, we can forgive him. He would only sped about 1 over the speed limit.
Only 1. Yeah, but I knew I was doing something wrong. And I knew I shouldn't have been doing it, but sometimes I enjoy speeding. I like driving fast, to be honest with
It's like
you.
you don't feel bad.
And, but I know it's wrong, and I know that there's a speed limit for a reason. And I know same thing goes for sins and, 10 commandments and, not only the 10 commandments, just half the laws that we have.
Everything else,
Everything.
the natural law that we have to follow,
Yeah.
which consider as wrongdoing for that matter.
Yeah.
Very good.
Right. Well, the thing about what Alvin said is that it may feel good to speed at the time, but with every action, there's a ripple effect. So, there's a consequence. You can choose your sin, but you can't choose the consequence. Now, if a child was walking through the road at night and you didn't see and you hit the child because you were speeding, then I'm sure you wouldn't enjoy speeding anymore, right?
I would
So-
God forbid, oh my goodness.
No,
That's
yeah.
where the whole
Or getting a ticket. We didn't
Right.
have to go as far
Yeah.
as
On a smaller scale, getting a ticket would do the trick.
right.
That's a very good point. Very good point. Bridget, how about you?
Well, I asked a friend, and he said that it is going against what the church teaches.
So more from a religious aspect,
Yeah.
that if the church teaches it to be wrong and I do it, therefore it's a sin. Okay, that's a fair understanding.
Yeah.
So we have something like that, and we have something like where it's the law of the land, so to speak, with speeding. By the way, if you want to, if you really like speeding, you should go to some of the European countries where they have
Oh, yeah.
the Autobahn.
It's crazy over there.
No speed limit certain times. You can just hit the gas and go.
I plan on doing that.
Sounds good. Let me ask you guys this. How do you know when you've committed a sin? How do you know? Basically, I hear this from different people when we're talking about, of course, when we're talking about somebody outside of religion, we do reference it as wrongdoing. How do you know when you have committed something wrong? But in the context that we're discussing sin from a religious aspect. How do you know, as some people call ourselves, sinner? How do you know you're a sinner?
You formed your conscience around it, really. Because there are a lot of people who wrongdoing, like you said, wrongdoing to them is not wrongdoing. We as we're growing up been taught that this is wrong, this is right, no, yes, all these kind of things. So we basically conformed our conscience around certain things, what is wrong and right. So when something happens, you might feel bad about it, or you feel upset, or consciously you start to think about it more. But if it wasn't really taught to you, like to a point where it's like, oh, this is wrong, and drilled into your head, it really wouldn't mean nothing. It wouldn't mean as much to a person who's been drilled in their head that this is wrong, Habibi, you can't do that, So
That's a good point.
Right.
I think I disagree with that, actually.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I think that if there was a person who was raised with absolutely no morals at all, they still have a conscience. Granted, the more you go against your conscience, the more desensitized you are to it, but we are all imprinted with that natural gift of love. And when you go against that, I think that your conscience lets you know.
Okay, so how do you know? How do you know when you've done something wrong or when you committed a sin?
Well, I'm knowledgeable of sins. I've educated myself, and so that's how I am now. Whereas before my conversion, my conscience is what told me that. Now, I compare my spiritual life a lot to my health life. I'm a big health freak. So I think of it like this. I can have a cheat meal, and I can enjoy that meal for those 10 minutes, and afterwards I can say, oh, I regret it. I wish I didn't eat that. But that doesn't change the fact that it made me take 10 steps backwards. Maybe I gained some weight, and it made me farther away from my goal. So I compare that with sin. Yes, I can sin, and I can regret it, and I can even confess it and receive absolution, but that still takes me farther away from my goal, which ultimately is heaven.
It's funny when you brought food into this, because being Chaldean, oh man,
Always hungry.
always I go to my grandma's house, and it's only me, my wife, and so on, and it's a table for 10. Yeah. I'm thinking, thank you, Nan, and you have to eat. But I just ate. Okay, let me just make you a big plate.
Just a little bit.
That's usually how it works.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Okay, so how do we know we're sinners? Alvin, what do you think? How do you know you're a sinner?
Me,
Are you a sinner?
I am.
Okay.
We're all sinners.
Okay.
For me, it's like I feel that when I do something wrong, I consciously like I feel it, like I just did something wrong, or when I am involved in doing something wrong. For example, that's kind of a hard question to ask, like generally speaking, because if I'm here in America, and there's a 15-year-old kid drinking alcohol, and I'll be like, wow, that kid should not be drinking. That's not good for kids, right? But I've heard of other countries that if you go to them, it's a normal thing.
Right.
And that they serve alcohol from vending machines and stuff. So it's like, I can't really go to that country and say, oh, that's wrong. I'll still feel that it's wrong, but then people will look at me like I'm crazy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so depending on where someone's living or what it's, you know, talking about, it would differ. But for me personally, it'd be like, according to the law of the land that I'm used to, the land of the law.
Law of the land.
The law of,
You
okay,
got
I was
it.
right the first time, sorry guys. The one that I'm used to, then I would be able to compare, you know, what's right and what's wrong. And to me personally, it's just like speeding, for example. I know I'm doing something wrong, so maybe I should slow down. You know, maybe a kid will come up in front of me, especially being in a small neighborhood or, you know, being in a small side street. Or for example, drinking too much. You know, everybody has a different limit of drinking, but I'm gonna have my own personal limit.
Gotcha.
You know?
All right. You know, this kind of relates with the next question. Is sin a bad thing? What do you guys think? Is sin really a bad thing?
Yeah.
In what way?
I mean, it takes you away from like peace. I mean, it takes the whole world from peace. When you have sin in your heart and anger inside of you, you know, the whole world and anyone you come across, you know, you guys are you get spaced away from God, and you know, you're not passing out when you're sinning, you're not passing love really in a way, whether it's to yourself or to others around you. So, I mean, you can look at it in that way, and you can look at it in the religious point of view. I mean, yes, sin will not, you know, lead you to heaven. So, I mean, there's two ways to really look at it. So.
That makes sense, that there are consequences. So I guess at the moment we could say sin may taste good or feel good, or using our senses it may seem something good, but it does have consequences. Jacob, what do you think? Is sin a bad thing?
Well, you know, with the law of the land, you know, if you speed, if you kill, if you do anything, there's consequences behind it. So with absolute truth that we spoke about last time, with sin, which is an absolute truth that we spoke about, there has to be consequences that comes around it. You know, if there's a consequence with the laws that we have in this world, there should be consequences with the laws of sin. You know?
So what you're saying is, just like how physically there are consequences, spiritually there are consequences.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but then if we really think that way, then why do we sin? I mean, if you really think about it, if we know there are consequences, whether physically or spiritually or intellectually or emotionally, why do we sin?
It feels good. I mean,
It's in our nature. I mean, you know, no, we're not born to be perfect. You know, we're not born to not sin. It's just.
You really think that? You really think that? I mean, can we say God did not make us perfect?
No, He did.
He did,
He made us in
but
His
then He
image.
made us have this decision, like this thing, human will, where you can kind of decide to go one way or the other. And I mean, in a world, you know, that's been going on for such a long time, it's so hard to, you know, stay perfect. I mean, you know, you're going to learn to go the other way because you can find ways to do things in an easier way. Or
Let me turn this around on you a little bit, Justine, and on all of us actually, and also you, the viewer. If I was to use I, why do I sin?
Well, because it works for right now.
That's fair.
That's it.
That's fair to say.
It feels good. I sometimes it feels good. You know, when you're in the midst of sin, you feel powerful. You know, like you gain a sense of power. You know, and that sense of power, you continue with it. But then eventually, you know, when you start thinking about it after the sin is committed, it hits you like a ton of bricks. Personally, it hits me like a ton of bricks. Personally, so
A lot of the times that I sin, I feel that they're habitual sins that I would in the past, I would have thought, oh, they were just normal things that I shouldn't really have to worry about. Like, swearing normally in conversations, gossiping, and like talking about people. And sometimes it gets to a point where now I realize, like, okay, it came from conversation to gossip. I should back out a little bit, Now I realize it. But before, it just felt normal. With everybody else, we're just sitting here talking and joking and gossiping and swearing, and it really is. They're all habitual sins.
Which sometimes it would lead to drinking, would lead to
doing
drugs or doing
Drinking-
things that are immoral. And
Drinking was a normal thing,
right.
and until I realized what my limit was. And now I'm like...
Which, as we've discussed, drinking is okay. It's the getting drunk or to the point where we cannot make a moral decision at that point in time.
Absolutely.
I think my reasoning for sin is that it's a beautiful deception. Like you said, sin tastes great. If it didn't feel good, none of us would be tempted to sin.
You're absolutely right. Sin does taste, or feels, or it's very pleasurable in its own, in that sense. What we do see, though, it has the reality of the consequences. And something the Lord says in John 8:34, He says, whoever commits sin is a slave to sin. So what we're going to do, we're going to look at this verse in a moment. We're going to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to see, are we slaves? And that's something for you to consider during the break. Are you a slave? We'll see you shortly. Welcome back. Before the break, we were looking at sin and we were seeing how does sin affect us. The reality behind sin is that it has the pleasure side of it, but it also has the consequences behind it. And just before the break, we had looked at a verse that the Lord said about in John 8:34, where He says, whoever commits sin is a slave to sin. So what do you guys think? Are you guys slaves? Well, before answering that question, I'm setting you up in the wrong way. Let me ask you this question. What is a slave?
It's somebody that's like a piece of property to another person.
Someone that's in shackles, they can't move. They're
When I think of a slave, I think of someone that, not necessarily property or someone in shackles. It could be just somebody that has to take orders from somebody. It doesn't necessarily mean it could be in a bad way. Like sometimes I could feel like I'm a slave to my job. I'm always thinking of my job. People are always calling me, telling me what to do, telling me where to go from here, getting transferred. Sometimes I feel like I could be a slave to my job. So
It's something that has power over you.
yeah,
Basically.
something that has power.
Yeah, I feel like it's, something that has power over you and something that you kind of can't really control. Like, if you're a slave, you're not in control of anything. Someone's in control of you. So really,
That's good.
All right, so if I'm a slave, let's say I'm a slave, okay? What do I have? I live a life of a slave. What do I have?
No control.
I have no control, so I lost my control. What do you think? Who tells me what to do?
Your slave owner.
The
Your
master.
The master. So I have a master. I have a master of some kind. Can I say no to my master?
It depends on who your master is.
There's
I feel like,
consequences.
right?
yes, I feel like you can say.
Yeah.
There may be consequences. Absolutely true. Okay, so what do you think? Now going back to the verse, whoever commits sin is a slave to sin. With that, what do you think Jesus meant?
Like a slave to the devil, kind of.
I feel like it's
That's
saying,
just what I think. Like, right when I hear that, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm a slave to sin. Like, sin is
Overpowering.
temptation, and then temptation comes from the devil. So that's just how that's how I feel.
I remember one time, it's funny you said that, Bridget. I remember one time when we look into today's culture, we were having a discussion with some people, and one of our friends said, it's funny, it's like the devil is no longer doing his work. we're doing it for him now.
Absolutely.
He's just sitting there and watching, and it's like watching us and having popcorn at the same
Right.
time. Just enjoying what we're doing.
Like a movie.
It's really strange how it's been changing, that we are enslaving almost ourselves, so to speak.
I actually want to reference something that I read of Mother Angelica's when she talks about sin. And she talks about how you can't blame a chained dog for biting you. If you're playing in the dog's pen where he's chained up, then how can you blame the dog? You can only blame yourself for getting too close to the dog. The dog can only go so far. So I really like that reference. I use it a lot in talks when I give talks to the youth in the church.
Beautiful, beautiful. So what do you think, further, what do you think Jesus meant?
It's basically telling you slave to sin. I mean, with sin comes consequences, right? That's what we've been talking about this whole time. So with those consequences, you're a slave to those consequences, and those consequences have an ultimate deadly, whatever you want to call it. I mean, it's hurtful,
Yeah, I feel like when he's saying like we're a slave to sin, he's saying like the sin is overpowering us. Like we can't control it. Like it's in control of us. And that's what I mean that's what I think. Like the sin is a master and we're the slave, and the sin is controlling everything we're doing. But for me, I don't feel like I'm a slave to sin, because I feel like I'm in control of my own self. I have the power to go one way or the other.
But it is a lack of freedom, really, the way I look at it.
Exactly. This is something very interesting that we're bringing up, because now we're talking about freedom. When we're talking about slavery, a slave doesn't have freedom, right? So, but what do we claim all the time? We claim independence.
Right,
Human will. I have my independence. I don't think I'm a slave to anybody. So the reality is, it's either I'm a slave or not. And the Lord says, I'm a slave to sin if I commit that sin. So I'll ask you guys this question. Let's look at it this way. If I'm a slave to sin, who's my master in this case?
The devil.
I believe the sin is your master. Not necessarily the devil, because...
By the way, we're breaking it down a little bit further. Let's think for ourselves. Let's think physically. If I think of a temptation that you would get, okay? What causes you to commit that sin? What causes you to not be able to say no and commit it?
Your conscience?
Yourself.
Yeah.
Selfishness, in a sense. I'm being selfish, to myself. It's discipline. I mean, I don't know how much to put it. I mean, you discipline yourself. You start to basically training yourself. I mean, training yourself not to do the things that, not to do the things that you're gonna do. Like when a temptation comes, which if you fall into it is the sin. It's
Yes.
not the temptation is not the wrong thing. It's the sin that you're slave to, not the temptation. So when that occurs through your training, I mean, through help like building your knowledge and building your understanding of it, like working out. I mean, you work out, you gain muscles. Same thing with temptation and sin. That's how you, like you said, how you would know, or how you would stop yourself.
You're right, Jacob. Thank you. Alvin, what do you think?
Me, I feel that our desire to sin has a big part of it, because it's like, why would I sin if I didn't want to? Would there be a sin if I didn't want to sin? It's like, for example, speeding or swearing or, other things, over drinking, getting drunk. If I didn't want to do that, I wouldn't be doing it.
You're right. And the reality that we see, that desire overpowers our will. My will, I think all of us in here, as we've realized, like one example, Rachel, when you brought up the food, one example that we use all the time is if there's a big chocolate cake right in front of us, for those who like chocolate, maybe you do, maybe you don't, but we'll say that we all love chocolate at the moment, or we all like it very much. So if there's a chocolate cake and I have an option of getting a small piece or a big piece, and I would always go for the big piece, I should go for the small piece. But knowing that, I have a desire to go for the big piece because I want more and more of it. How do I feel as soon as I eat that big piece of cake? While I'm eating it, how do I feel?
Good.
Oh, great.
I
I love
Pleasure.
chocolate cake.
right?
I love
You're with me on that. But then now, let's say a half hour later, how do I feel?
Bad.
Like you shouldn't
Regretful.
have eaten it.
Yeah. Almost to the point of
Like you
feeling
cheated.
guilty. Yeah, like I cheated, like I
Yeah.
did something wrong.
Yeah.
I know I did something wrong. And so what takes over me, and this is my personally speaking, what takes over me is the desire. I want, but my mind is saying, hey, don't do it. And my body's saying, oh, I want to do it. At some point in time, yeah, go ahead, Jacob.
But you could, in a sense, you could train those desires though. Like you might desire it, which is like a temptation, like I was saying before. But at the same time, you strengthen that ability to look at that and say, you know what, that's not good for me, and you walk away from it. Yeah, you might desire it, but those will minimize, as you start getting stronger. Your desires for that chocolate cake, yeah, they might be there, but eventually it's going to be like, all right, whatever, and you're going to walk away from it.
What I noticed is to replace the unhealthy things in my life, I replaced them with things that were healthy but still tasted good. And I think the same concept goes with sin. If you're taking out a sin, you have to fill it with something good. You can't just take it out and leave a void. It doesn't work like that. You have to fill it with something good.
I remember a friend of mine was trying to quit smoking. And so she did, and the way she replaced it was by eating candy.
Yeah.
That didn't go very well either. So it's what to replace with. It's a good point. We will discuss how to control and how to maintain it, sooner than later. But let me ask you guys. I'm going to ask you guys a little bit of a personal question, and feel free to however you want to say it. Have you ever had a sin where you were a slave to, or felt like a slave to? And I'll be honest. I'll speak for myself. Many times I realized early on is that, of course, I enjoy prayer, but I would find myself finding myself I'm lazy to pray. And this laziness used to get me all the time. I know what I need to do. My desire, however, depending on how I look at it, my spiritual desire, my physical desire is, okay, I'm just going to skip it, eat some chips and watch TV, versus I have my prayer that I want to do. And so, how did I handle that? I'll tell you guys in a little bit. But have you ever had a situation where you really felt like you were a slave to a certain sin?
I was a slave to pornography, and it's a big deal in our life right now. Personally for me, I was a slave for a long time, but eventually I found my way out of it. Thank God. A lot of men do struggle with that personally, that I know. And it goes beyond sin. It goes into the psyche, and it messed me up for a long time. But eventually I figured out that, hey, look, am I going to continue to be a slave to this, or am I going to jump out of it and live a more fulfilled life? And I eventually started living a more fulfilled life.
That's a good point.
I struggled with a few sins. One in particular was really tough for me. I literally felt like a slave to it. And it's such a bad feeling. It really is such a bad feeling. And I remember thinking, I don't know how I'm going to get through this. And I kept having to remind myself that if God is calling me to do this, then I can do it. So I turned to prayer. I really turned to prayer, like prayed the rosary every day. And that's tough for me. I have a very busy schedule. And while I do pray throughout the day, praying a rosary and a chaplet every day, that's a big commitment for me. And I did that. And it took the desire away. I mean, it wasn't completely gone, but it diminished it. And so I really found strength in prayer.
Beautiful. While we're on this, how does, Jacob brushed on a little bit, and as we're talking here, how does it affect us personally? How does sin affect us personally? How does it affect you personally? Any sin. Now, it's not just the ones where we feel slave to, but how does it affect you, sin in general?
I mean, after a while, you start to feel sick, and you don't know what's wrong with you. Like, for example, like with me, like I feel one of the tricks of the devil is discouragement. Like I used to wake up and want to go to church, but I wouldn't. I felt like I didn't belong there, kind of thing. And one day I was just like, you know what, I'm going to church. So what I did, I wore my church outfit. I sat all the way in the back. And then, slowly but surely, I started going closer and closer and closer. And I mean, now I'm an altar server. So, He's not going to discourage me anymore, you know, with the help of God.
Sure.
So, I mean, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. Philippians 4:13.
Thank you, Bridget. Beautiful. Very true. Justine,
Well,
how
for
about you?
me, it's more as I feel guilty when, you know, I sin. You know, you have that guilt feeling. I feel regretful, and sometimes it's the knowledge that I have more so than the feelings. I try to change myself to think, you know, it's not. I can't always just think, you know, because I feel bad, I'm not going to do this. It's because I know that it's wrong, that I'm going to stop doing it, and that goes hand in hand with.
Absolutely, you're right. And if we really think about it, think personally. I mean, I remember, you know, of course, we all sin, and I know when I sin, my day goes wrong, to be honest. That day I'm like, or the next day I'm thinking, oh man, you know, I'm not straight with the good Lord right now. I'm not in a good relationship. So my day gets affected. Now, obviously, some of it I have to be careful because some of it could be where I'm not realizing God's mercy behind it, that I could receive God's mercy. But it does affect me. It does affect me right after, you know, immediately after the sin. It affects me even in thought. In a way, it affects me how I'm held back now. Kind of like you were saying, what Rachel was saying with the workout.
Could it also be conscious though? Like consciously, you're just thinking that? I mean, I know the sin might have put you back, or you felt like bad, or the day went bad, but could that have been just you thinking that? You know?
Yes, actually, in fact, yes, you're absolutely right. It is me. It is. There is the consequence of the sin, depending on what it is. There's the physical and the spiritual consequence, but there's also the intellectual consequence, and that's when I feel that day, you know, it's kind of like when if my wife and I had an argument, I'm not going to be good that day, you know, I'm just going to be like, okay, how am I going to, you know, how are we going to fix this situation or that discussion that we had last night or the day before, or whatever it is, or a couple hours ago or a few moments ago.
Now, for me personally, it has gotten to a point where it can really ruin my day. Like if I feel like after I sin, and I feel like I'm upset that I sinned, and then from being upset, I get angry, and then my anger would be expressed to my family members, my friends, and then it would really ruin my day. You know, because sometimes I've gotten to the point where I just feel so low and so angry at myself that I'm not always going to let it out on myself. You know, we're only human. We're going to let it out on other people, unintentionally, of course.
Isn't it strange how the chain reaction goes that, you know, I committed the sin, and I would now, aside from the sin itself, I would have a bad day that I take it out on other people.
Yeah.
That's what we have to be careful with. You're absolutely right.
It's happened.
Right.
It really is a chain reaction. I notice that whenever I do what God wants me to do, as hard as it is, even though it's obviously the narrower road, whenever I do what he wants me to do, it always ends up right. It always works out right. And then when I do it my way, it ends badly, and I'm just like, oh, I'm sorry, God, I should have just done it your way. So that's what I use whenever I'm really tempted to sin, that's what I use as my comfort, and it helps.
While we're on this, and as we're talking about chain reactions, how does sin, so we're talking about personally how sin affects us. How does it affect society all around us? I mean, I commit a sin. Does it affect society? Do all sins affect society?
Absolutely.
I think so, especially if you're like a leader, like some kind of a leader in, you know, the country or city or state, whatever.
Or youth group.
Or youth group, exactly. Or
Especially
youth
for us
group.
who are in front of the youth or
Yeah.
in the
Like
public eye, so to speak.
Yeah, like I said before, I'm an altar server now. I have to be very careful, like in front of my sister. Like my sister's 13. I have to be really careful what I say, what I do. Like I have to be a really good example to these young girls. I mean, I can't serve in front of church and, you know.
You're absolutely right. Somebody
Yeah.
could be looking at you. I remember a priest told me before, you know, I became a subdeacon and everything. A priest told me, Bashar, if somebody sees you the night before, we'll use the terminology of today, wasted on the floor at a club, and next day you're serving up on the altar, what does that say about faith or the church or the Lord or God in general?
Exactly, or even like with girls these days, like the new thing is like belly tops. Like I can't serve at church and then wear a belly top when I'm not at church. I mean, I can dress really cool, I can be fashion forward if I want, but I have to be modest. Like I gotta keep it classy.
As we're talking about society, we'll take a break. And when we come back, think of how in your mini society, in the family or among your friends, how sin affects your life. And when we come back, we're going to talk about sin's best friend. We're going to see what that is. See you shortly. Welcome back. Before the break, we were discussing how sin affects us personally and how sin affects, as we started talking about, how sin affects our society. And we're going to bring up sin's best friend in just a moment. But let's go back to how sin affects our society. What do you guys think? How does it?
I think it affects it horribly. Really.
Can you give an example?
Like, it can be like a domino effect. Like if I were to gossip, for example, about somebody, that goes to Rachel, and then it goes to Alvin, then it goes to you, then it goes, back to Jacob, then it goes to Justine, and then when it's back to me, it's completely different. It's totally different. It's like playing telephone. Like, and to be like real about it, it's not fair to the person that I'm gossiping about.
I agree, especially in our community. The Chaldean community is a very close, tight-knit community. All of the families know each other, and the way we look at it is if there's a rumor being spread about someone, it's almost a shame to the family, not just the person, the whole family. So if Bridget's saying something completely untrue about me, it makes my whole family look bad. And like Bridget said, it's not fair. It's not fair because regardless if it's true or not, there's really no recovering from that. It's like throwing a handful of salt on the floor and trying to pick up every grain. It's impossible.
Yeah.
I feel like it's almost better, like when you're the person being gossiped about, I feel like it's almost better if you just don't say anything and let that person look bad. Let that person, let it like project out of them. Like, why are you saying this? And she's not even, fighting back.
Yeah. Sure. But it's good to rebuke. It's good. Like if I hear it, I hear gossips about me all the time, and my friends would come and tell me, or whatever it is, hey, so-and-so gossip. My first question is why are you transferred to a person who delivered the news? Why are you bringing something like this? But thank you for bringing something like this. Make sure that it's valid, and then I would call the person immediately that they said something about you, just in case there's a misunderstanding. So there are some ways of resolving it, but you're absolutely right. If I was to say something negative about somebody, especially in our community, I always get people who call me, I want to, go out with this person to be engaged, to be married, and this and that. What do you think of the family? And people always ask me this question. I'm thinking, wow, what? I heard this rumor about this family or whatnot, and you're right. That the tongue can spread like we read in James, it's like wildfire that's not controlled.
It can create and destroy.
Yes, absolutely.
So small, but it can create and destroy.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Takes peace away from the whole society. I mean, what's our common goal amongst each other is peace, and everyone's always talking about world peace, but really when there is sin, how could we ever get to that point,
Absolutely. Isn't it funny or sad I should say, when, even among countries, if we really think about it, we were talking about society earlier, and of course we have the mini society, which is the family, we have the macro society, that we all live in, and then on a larger scale, the countries, but the problems that happen in a family, which is the micro society, could be the same problems that happen on a macro level and even between countries. This president doesn't like this president or whatnot, and problems can happen. Yeah. Invasions would happen, or pride gets in the way.
Well, that's when they start to justify it. So,
which leads us into the next point, and that is sin's best friend, and that is rationalization. What do you think? What is rationalization?
Rationalization, for me, it plays a huge part in my life with sin, regarding sin. I justify so many things. Well, God is so merciful. Well, He's also just. And I also justify the fact that we have confession to fall back on. And it's an abusive confession. That's exactly what it is. I know that I have confession to fall back on, which allows me to fall into temptation.
Very good. There's also the other side of it, where I would say, well, it's okay. Like an example that I would say, for example, with going back to my laziness in prayer, I would go, well, it's all right. I'm going to pray it before I go to sleep, and then comes the time before I go to sleep, I'll just pray tomorrow first thing in the morning. And before you know it, it's a week later, and I haven't, done my prayers. Now, the big question is, unfortunately, is the evolution of rationalization. And the evolution of rationalization is where we no longer have to think about it. And have you ever come across a situation, unfortunately, many of the people today don't even think about it, don't recognize it, don't go, it's a sin. Have you ever come across a situation like that? Where somebody comes up to you and says, well, it's not a sin, doesn't affect me, doesn't affect the world.
Oh, yeah.
What would you say to them?
Going back to what you said about premarital sex, I've had many conversations with people who just say that what harm can having sex with my boyfriend do? Well, can you imagine a world where everyone waited until marriage for sex? No STDs, no unwanted pregnancies, which would no cheating. I mean, science even tells us to wait until marriage for sex. So really, you think that you're not doing any damage now, but like you said, if you look at the grand scheme of things, what if you fall out of love with this person, and then the next person, and the next thing you know, you have 10 people under your belt, and there goes society.
Right.
Well, I have people telling me that we're, if I'm saying the word right, primitive species, where it's in our nature to have sex with everything. Like to have sex with girls and whatever it is. It's in our nature to not be monogamous, to have more than one.
Yeah,
so
they're
what do you?
justifying it.
Yeah, they're basically justifying in a sense. So what do you tell that kind of person?
Right. It's actually a very good point. What a lot of people don't realize is we are sexual beings. Nobody says sex is bad. The church doesn't say. The Lord doesn't say. In fact, His first command: be fruitful and multiply. It's so for us to not take that serious. No, it's something that's really extremely not good. The reality is it has its proper place, and just like with anything else, when we're talking about sin, a lot of times many things have their proper place. Drinking, when we're talking about sexual activity, when we're talking about enjoyment of things. Some people, for example, have a problem with gambling, and it's an addiction. So some people would say, well, the church says, you can't play, therefore now it becomes desirable. Look at the justification. It becomes desirable, therefore I'm going to go and do it. Well, for passing of time, if a couple of us got together and we played a game of poker that doesn't involve anybody, let's say involves $1 on each, that it doesn't affect us in any way, we're just playing a friendly game. There's nothing wrong with that. Gambling is where I'm wasting my money, where I'm wasting everything that comes to me. Instead of feeding my children or my wife or my family, I'm going to take the money and waste it in that way. One thing I did hear about sin, a beautiful statement from somebody, is that sin wastes time, and Jesus never wasted time. That's something that's very beautiful.
I love that.
I'm going to leave you with a question and something that I would like you to tell our viewers. Is it better, or is it more fulfilling to live a life to try and staying away from sin versus a life of, as we call it, I am free of thinking about sin, free of thinking about guilt, free of thinking about all these things. I'm just going to do whatever my desires tell me to do. Which is better? And I think we all can agree that obviously the fulfilling life is the life that when we're trying to fight sin. But what would you tell the viewer? Why is that a better life?
Coming from me personally, I know that out there are people that haven't done anything except for sin, that basically they're just used to a sinful life. And on the other side, there are people out there that have never done a wrong thing in their life, just pure of heart and very nice, genuine, good people. Me personally, I know from both sides. And I've had experience in a sinful, in a just a low down, sinful life, going from that, coming to, just trying to be the best person that I could be and the best person that Christ wants me to be. I could honestly say that you do not want the sin, because any sin I've ever committed has been just a big regret that I waste my time thinking about.
Beautiful. Thank you, Alvin. Rachel, how about you?
Well, my perception of life is that you're either going upward or you're going downward. You're never just going in a straight line. You're either going up or you're going down. And before my conversion, before I had any knowledge of sin, when I just did whatever I pleased, I was going downward. And now that I strive every day to stay as far away from sin as possible, I feel myself going upward, and it's the most fulfilling, satisfying feeling I have ever felt in my life.
Thank you. Bridget?
Okay. Well, I have a bucket list. And on my bucket list, number 1 is getting into heaven. And it's funny because the first thing that I want is the last thing that I'm probably going to get, hopefully. So I work towards getting into heaven. So me making, little mistakes, like little sins here and there, it takes me away from heaven. It takes me away from my goal.
It's a beautiful thing when your focus becomes on heaven itself. And it's true. One thing that we did not really go into today is that the major consequence of sin is that we could lose the opportunity of making it to heaven. We would lose that connection with God, where the soul would unfortunately not end up, we do know that there is an eternity, and to not end up for eternity with God is something that could be, aside from catastrophic, if there's a bigger word that I could think of, it's just it's a huge, huge mistake that can happen, definitely. Thank you, Bridget. Justine?
For me, it's like, if God is, God created me, God has his arms wide open for me, and every single day is a battle, why not win it? I have the power, I'm not a slave to sin. I have the power. Why not take the good route, the route that because God wants me. His arms are wide open. It's a battle, and the heavens are cheering me on to win it. So, why take the other route when, you have people on your side, you have the saints on your side, wanting you there with them. So
Beautiful. Thank you.
Personally, to me, I'm a sinner, and I ask for mercy every day from Jesus Christ. But at the same time, sin is death. It brings death. So do I want to die? No, I do not. Plus, I'm a servant. When I serve the Lord and I want to love people, sin is a lack of love. So for me personally, I want to love other people. And when I'm sinning, I'm wasting time. So if I'm wasting time, then I'm not loving. So if I'm not loving, then how am I going to bring people to Christ? And that's just me personally. So I would rather pick the better life, which is following Christ in heaven, So.
It's very true. Something that we all can attest to is that sin has a chain reaction. It's not just a benefit for ourselves, but it has a chain reaction that can benefit society when we try to fight it, especially when we try to fight it together. We bring each other. None of us in here is claiming to say that we're not sinners. We are all sinners. And we're among good friends. I think we're very safe to say that even you watching us are a sinner just like us. And we're all just normal people with normal lives who do sin on a regular basis. One thing I noticed during the time before my conversion is that I treated my conscience as a guard dog. And what I mean by that is, the thief would come in the middle of the night and I would hear the dog barking. And at some point in time I would say, okay, the dog's barking for a reason. My conscience telling me, hey, you're about to commit a sin, you're about to do something wrong. And I would go and watch out for it. But at some point in time, I gave that up. I wanted to live the life of the flesh, so to speak, or just follow my desires. And when the dog used to bark, at some point in time, I would say, okay, I hear the dog, it's becoming annoying. And at some point in time, I would go out and, mentally speaking, is shoot the dog. And now I don't have to worry about my conscience anymore. The result of that is what I noticed now when I compare this life to that previous life, is that the thief came and robbed everything I had, robbed my joy, robbed my happiness, robbed every kind of emotional or intellectual good or spiritual good that I had. And that's what the Lord provides. So something to think about is to compare that life, or to even try it, to fight sin. What we're going to do is we're going to leave you with this spiritual and intellectual workout. And that is, before we started this episode, in the last episode, we asked you to write down the number of times you said a bad word or cussed. Now we're going to ask you to write down as many wrongdoings or sins that you find doing during the day. This is just a spiritual workout, intellectual workout for you to know about yourself. And what we're going to do next time we meet, we're going to talk about how to get rid of these sins that we have. You don't have to share those sins with anybody, but with you. One thing you know about yourself. And now it's time to learn more about yourself. And we're going to see how next time we can even reach a better version of that self. Pushu b'shtama.